What would Hawaii's economy, our food, and our diet look like without the honeybee? To answer these questions and try to understand the vital role that bees play here in Hawaii, I have brought a beekeeper and an expert, Howard McGinnis, to help us understand the role of Hawaii bees. So welcome, Howard.
Well, thank you for having me on your show.
Let's give just a little bit of background of how we met. I actually had a swarm of bees in our hibiscus plants, and our neighbor kids noticed them, and then I was able to alert you and have you come and rescue, I would say. Rescue
is a good term.
Rescue our bees. And so because of this, I thought, you know, this is something that's really important to help others and myself and people in Hawaii, our legislatures, and the agriculture department to understand how important the honeybee is in our role for food, for security, and again, for our diet. So can you share about that a little bit?
Yes. The honeybee plays an important part in the agriculture here in Hawaii, with a couple of very major crops, watermelon, macadamia nut, and a lot of other crops such as pumpkins, squash, cucumbers, melons. And it's not just the food that they provide, it's also the employment for, you know, the farmers, not only for the farmers themselves, but farm workers. So there's a really big, the bee touches on an awful lot of things here in Hawaii. I was glad when you did call because honeybees are, unlike the mainland where if I don't have bees, I can pick up the phone and call, and you know, in 2 days I'll have a package of bees or several packages or hundreds of hives worth of bees. In Hawaii, we don't have that opportunity, so we have to work with what we have. So when you call and you said you had a swarm, I'm excited because I love catching swarms, and I also like the fact that I have another hive, and that hive is going to be useful in several ways. One, since I earn my living by robbing the bees and selling honey, it's another aid. These bees will make something of value for me, but these will also help farmers produce watermelons and cantaloupes, and in turn they'll continue to hire people. We'll continue to have good produce here in Hawaii. The more we produce here in Hawaii, the less we have to import. The less we import, the better off it is for all of us. We reduce our need for, you know, oil because it takes something to get here. It helps in that our agriculture that produces products here, the money stays here, as opposed to going to California or Florida or someplace else.
So the bees really help to support the local farmers, the local growers.
And because they are keeping people employed, those people have money to spend here in Hawaii on, you know, more produce. Another important thing too is the less we import, the less risk we have for other invasive species coming in. And I'm sure we'll be talking about the two major pests that are really affecting bees and have been since 2004 and really threaten the existence of the bee here in Hawaii.
Well, that's why I thought this was so important. When the neighborhood boys noticed this, we really were able to turn it into a learning situation, because a lot of times people panic and they want to destroy the swarm. But I seen the opportunity, and being able to connect with you, we were actually able to bring the kids in and show them how, and that's what I loved about being able to expand and now do this TV show, was to educate people out there, you know, because it seems like we don't have enough understanding. And then the legislature and the Hawaii Department of Agriculture, there's little funding or even consideration on how vital the role of the bees are. And so it was really neat to see you in action. And and that the bees were safely captured. How did you become a beekeeper? How did you start doing all this?
It's a long road to how I got here, but in 2004, I was working in industrial computers, doing it remotely, so I did it.
So you were a geek.
Yes, yes, and I still am a geek. Once a geek, always a geek. But I lived in Waikiki in this beautiful state, and yet being trapped in Waikiki, never having, never going anywhere and doing, I thought I'd try to find some employment outside that would get me outside. And I was looking through the Honolulu Advertiser one day, and I saw a rather large ad for part-time beekeeper. And it just intrigued me because in all the times I've ever looked in the want ads in the newspaper, I have never seen beekeeper. Nobody's ever advertised for a beekeeper before, and in 40 some odd years of me looking. And so I thought, computers, bees, and that would get me outside and in the, into Hawaii. And so I applied for the job. It was an interesting interview because they actually paid you to come out and beekeep for a day, and then they had 20 questions after that, and I ended up with the job. I've since kind of cut back my computing work. I find bees much more fascinating. It's a rewarding profession, because when I do go into a local supermarket and I see a watermelon and I know that, I had a small part in that watermelon. Granted, it's the bees, but it's my stewardship of the bees that, keeps the numbers up, that makes them, make melons and cantaloupes and things like that. So here it is, 7 years later. I'm still beekeeping. I still find it just as fascinating as the first day. It's a constant source of learning. When you brought the kids over to see the bees, one of my passions is to teach people about bees and to help them not be afraid of them, respect them, give them their space, but to see that these aren't the ogres that everybody, they're not coming out to sting you. They don't want to sting you. Swarms are very gentle, and you saw that by the fact that I'd never even bothered to suit up. And when I first came over, you were standing in the hedges on a step stool, about as close as, a layperson would be, around them. So
I was actually taking pictures of the bees because I thought, what an opportunity, here they are in the hibiscus, and to see them. And I actually thought it was a honeycomb of bees.
Right.
So talk a little bit about it, really, because it was this big ball of bees.
What you saw was a swarm, and it's a naturally occurring event. It used to occur in the spring and fall, and what happens is when we start getting flowers, the bees start reacting by collecting more nectar. The queen reacts by laying more eggs as the hive prepares to do a lot of foraging and start building up, honey stores to make up for what they may have consumed over our winter, rainy season. So at some point, the hive just fills up. There's no more room to put honey. There's no more room for the queen to lay eggs, and it's time for the hive to divide in two. The old queen and half a hive will leave and go out and find a new place to start a colony, and this is what ended up on your hibiscus bush. And somewhere in the vicinity is the parent, or where this hive originated from. So when they come, there's no comb. They don't bring any comb with them. It's just a cluster of bees, and it can be anywhere from 5,000 to, I've probably seen swarms with 20,000 bees, from a very large, in 2005 time frame. We don't see them that large, that much anymore. But they're on a mission to find a new home. They're all full of nectar. Mm-hmm. They're a bee stings to defend her hive. A swarm has no hive, and this is why we can approach them. And it's not something that I recommend that you do. Like, basically you want to stay away from them and let a professional deal with it. But they are approachable. And
well, they were. I was surprised. For some reason, I was just so fascinated, and maybe it was that ignorance of fascination that allowed me to get so close to them, because afterwards, I know a couple people were like,
"You're crazy." Yeah, yeah, and your behavior was different than a lot of people. Most people, when this huge swarm comes in, they're like, "Ah!" And I've seen a cul-de-sac in Eva one time. All 5 houses got in their cars inside the garage, and they left because a swarm landed on one of the garages. Most people's reactions are not like yours. They're, like you say, they panic. They see this huge swarm of bees, and I don't know if you got an opportunity to watch them come in, but the sky will just be black with bees, and there's a huge roar. These things will just be in the air, and then they'll just manage to coalesce into a ball, and you end up with a swarm. But most people are terrified by it, and the reaction is, got to get some Raid, got to spray them, got to do something. I can't have them around here, and that's really the wrong attitude for several reasons. One is because every swarm is an opportunity for us to repopulate, lost bees.
Well, that's why I thought this would be so important, because to bring about some public awareness that yes, you don't want to be overly brave, but what can you do? And we really want the population to grow because it's dwindled. It's
dwindling, and we're faced by some new pests that are going to make it even tougher, put more pressures on the bees. And so every swarm is special. Every swarm is really vital. I can't say with any authority what the state does if you call the state, but the state doesn't have provisions for keeping bees. So my guess is the state will destroy them. They're not a beekeeping agency, and they have a lot of liability associated with that.
Well, is there certain things too? Because if I would have sprayed them, or are there certain things like, do I pretty much make them incapable of being useful, or?
Yes, if you first of all, if a swarm comes to you and you do what you did, which is the appropriate thing, is to call a beekeeper. We can come out and we can quickly eliminate the problem. We can take them away, and we can do it really fast. In your case, we elected to leave them, just till night to let them all kind of settle down. But we can deal with the problem quickly. We can get them out of the public's, thing. We can also use that as an education opportunity too, because they're rare. Swarms don't occur all the time, and it is a good time for people to come up close, like when you brought the children over, and they actually got up on the step stool and they're almost face into the bees, and it's an opportunity that we don't get very often. We don't see many kids even seeing anything with agriculture, so this is the bee is a corner post of agriculture, and this is a good opportunity to see it. When you do something like spraying them, the hive is of less value to me, because a hive that's been sprayed with pesticides is going to die. And in all honesty, what's my return on the investment of time that I'm going to put into them? There is no return at that point. They're going to die, and nothing of value will come out of it for me. So there is an ulterior motive for me, catching swarms. Is these become my farm workers. They become pollinators. And they're something that will live. The hive itself will live a long time, hopefully. When you spray, you diminish their value to everybody. You also take a risk on breaking the hive or the swarm apart. They've collected on that tree for a reason, and inside that clump of bees is a very important bee, the queen bee. If anything happens to her, then the hive will die. That swarm will die. Unlike the hive that they came from, if the queen dies, they can rear another queen because they have eggs, they have larvae to do that with. But a swarm has nothing. There's no eggs. So
there's no honeycomb.
There was no honeycomb.
That's what I was amazed. There was once they boxed themselves.
Just big clump of bees.
Yeah.
Now, had they stayed there for a couple of days, they will draw a comb, if that's where they elected to stay. Right. But by not spraying them, even though I guess your neighbor did spray them a little bit.
A few that were going by the window. And that's why I knew. I was like, we've got to really help these bees right away before we lose the whole.
And I was so appreciative One, because I met you. I also met Carol. You know, and I got to eat
Good
tons
food.
of sweets afterwards.
Well, we had pho and good
Yeah,
vegetables,
and
and even vegetables actually need that pollination of the flowers.
some vegetables do. Not all vegetables, but the accepted value is 1/3 of the food that we eat requires a honeybee.
So maybe avocados. Does our coffee? Does
Coffee, there's plants evolved to attract certain pollinators, or to not use a pollinator, like wind. You know, tomatoes don't need, they don't need bees. They're wind pollinated. They benefit from carpenter bees, the black bumblebees, because they buzz the pollen loose, and then the wind is able to carry it to the next flower. So the bee, even though it's not an active pollinator, has a benefit, not the honeybee, but a carpenter bee. Honeybees generally make things better. Coffee, while the bee may not be the primary pollinator, maybe you get a 10% increase, you know, in yield if the bees are around than if you don't have bees. So they touch on things.
so? It actually increases the quality of the fruits and vegetables.
Well,
when
in
you
some
have bees.
fruits, such as watermelon, it is highly dependent on the number of bees that visit each flower. And the number is between 8 and 15 times that a bee has to visit that flower to get a good fruit set. If you have too few bees, you have too few visits, you know, to the flower, you're going to get a watermelon that's going to be misshapen. It's going to be small. Your yields aren't going to be, you know, as good. And so melons are highly dependent on, you know, honeybees for, you know, for pollination. And there really is no other insect that has that many, you know, that population that can address so many, you know, flowers. Right now we're coming into watermelon season, so just acres and acres out in Eva and Kunia are being planted by, you know, watermelon. And the bees are very, very important. No bees, no watermelon.
And so one of the things you had mentioned you're working with, and I'm really glad to hear, because for a while we were really hearing how the bees were struggling, was the UHB project. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of that?
I wish some of the honeybee project people were here. The University of Hawaii Manoa has a honeybee project, and they've been instrumental in helping Hawaii's beekeepers keep our hives going through research of different varroa control mechanisms. We're faced with two pests, two known pests in honeybees right now.
Well, known to beekeepers, but I don't know if the general public knows as much.
And one thing that, the thing that amazes me is people seem to think that because we don't hear about varroa in the news anymore, that the problem is gone, that we don't, I hear people, so the mite's been licked, you know, we've got that solved.
Well, that's the common one we hear, though.
Right, and it's not true. The varroa is still here, and it's still the biggest problem as it was in 2004 when it was first detected here. It's just that there's not any coverage of it. And the plight of bees doesn't seem to be that important in the big scheme of things when you're looking at, you know, unrest in the Middle East and the tsunami in Japan. You know, there's far probably more pressing issues. And so problems with the honeybees have really kind of dropped out of sight. But the problems are still here. Varroa is still here. It's still very much a pest. We've picked up a new pest, the small hive beetle, which arrived in the Big Island in May of 2010, and it showed up in here, I believe, in April of 2010. And
So
it's
a
whole new pest. It's considered a secondary pest. Varroa weakens a hive, and then the small hive beetle lays eggs, and the hive is too weak to, you know, to deal with that. So the Honeybee Project has been instrumental in helping us figure out ways to combat varroa. They worked with a manufacturer of an organic mite control. That one of the most common ones is a miticide that goes in the hive, and you have to pull the boxes off to make honey, and it's 6 weeks. And it works fine on the mainland, where maybe you have downtime. But in Hawaii, our bees can make honey year-round. And so if you pull their boxes for them, if you remove the space where they can make honey, they swarm. because they're driven.
And then they'll leave.
They're driven to make honey. So this one miticide apistand is very effective, but it has a lot of drawbacks. One is the mites develop resistance. It is a miticide, so we have to be very careful about honey production with it. We can't make honey when it's in the hive.
And that's one of the things about Hawaii is we produce some of the most 100% pure honey. And so one of the things you do with the bees is not just help to keep the population growing, but you actually have the production, which is the nalo meli.
Yeah, nalo meli is we're to put it, we rob bees.
But tell me what the meaning of
nalo meli is Hawaiian for honeybee, and it's been around since I believe 2000. And I purchased the company after working part-time for the previous owners, who are the ones that put the ad in the newspaper that caught my attention, and here I am now, going, oh gosh, I got pests,
But people really, honey has some good health benefits. So
honey has some good
necessary part of a lot of people's diet.
And this is why it's important when we treat pests that we treat them, responsibly. That we make sure that we're doing it as organically as possible with as few chemicals. And this is where UH has been instrumental. I want to come back and really, plug them, because without their help, we would probably be in a lot worse shape.
Well, and they probably need more help too, because with the funding dwindling, someone could just say, well, bee program, not important. And that's one of the things that sort of concerns me, is with the amount of food that we're importing. If anything ever happens and we can't receive, fruits and vegetables, and then the exporting of cash, that's a big concern, where we could be keeping that money here for local farmers, creating local jobs, and not only, honey, then you got packaging, and so it's a whole line of trade that, we keep that money here versus sending that money and exporting it to the mainland. And so it keeps the bees keep our economy healthy.
They do, and they're also, in some aspects, they're a canary, in that we have seen 2 invasive species that are devastating to bees move into Hawaii. And so what is this telling us? Is this telling us that we're not effective in our surveillance at port areas? How are these pests getting in here? Is it because there's not enough funding for surveillance programs, to add inspectors? So because the pests that are plaguing the honeybees are really only one. There are two species of insects that have gotten in here. How many other ones are getting here? So really,
the more we're importing, the more risk we have of bringing
things in, not only that will affect the honeybee, but look at we're now having problems with tomatoes. We're having problems with basil. We've got coffee problems. Now whether or not these are caused by invasive species, I don't know. But every time we do bring a boatload of produce in that we could grow here, like you say, it's cash flowing out of Hawaii. It's that's not going to be spent in the local economy, which will help other businesses. So it's really important. But that's what I'm saying. The bees are a canary. They're kind of a wake up call and go, when have we seen anything so affected, and yet so much in the public eye? As before 2004, before Varroa came here, everybody took bees for granted. Choke bees. There are bees all over the place. The farmers, probably 50% of the pollination came from feral colonies, wild hives. When one invasive species comes in, and comes into an area like Hawaii that everything does well here. We grow flowers like nobody else.
Well, it's paradise. We want to keep it that way.
But every invasive species that come here thinks it's paradise also. So our mite problems are probably more so than the mainland.
Yeah, and because we're so far away, when our food supplies, when the food we're growing gets lost, when we lose those local supply chains.
Yes. Then we're going to be eating corn. That's what we're growing now. We're growing an awful lot of corn, and I'm not really thinking that's going to be good when, you know, when oil prices
Especially
go
if
up.
you're a vegetarian, or, you know, some people eat a lot of fruits and vegetables, and so, yeah, it's...
Well, one of the things on, I don't know, I can mention Carol's show, that Scott with the UH Honeybee program brought up was the fact that without bees, some farmers are shifting to a less profitable crop. So, and he specifically mentioned the winter melons. Winter melons apparently bring in, you know, a good profit, and that's really what farming is all about. It's as much as we would like to think that it's, you know, to provide food for people. It's all about earning a living. So when you don't have bees and the winter melons aren't like you want, and you shift to something that's less profitable, you know, you're not making as much money, and maybe you're struggling, you know, a little bit more. So even a little thing like that, you know, the farmer's still growing as much stuff as he had, but he's growing a different type of crop.
Well, and, you know, with the amount of the population we have on Oahu alone, you know, sometimes we forget the importance of agriculture. You know, we want to just build more roads and build more houses
yes,
and more buildings, and we really forget the scheme of things, that our food security is really important, that if for whatever reason we can't get the ships, Matson can't come with all the food and Young Brothers, or if the price of oil continues to rise, which it is every day, that we're not going to be able to afford the food that we're used to eating, which is basic lettuce, tomatoes, and other things, that watermelon.
And this is one of the things that scares me as I look at several weeks ago, the Honolulu Magazine, or maybe 2 months ago, had an insert that was the long-range master plan for Kapolei. And in it, it showed all of the most productive farmland, you know, on Oahu, is all residential.
Yeah.
And
so I want you to hold this thought, because we're going to do part 2, because this is really, really important. How if we don't think in the scheme about keeping our ag land, that, you know, what boat are we going to be on? And we are in the middle of the ocean, so you could say we are on a big boat. So I want you to hold that thought. I want to thank you for coming here, and we'll continue with part 2, talking about honeybees in paradise. So
I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you, Howard.